Hello, this is Ling Chi, Chinese brush painting for beginners. Today is the first time we're going to demo online about fine line painting, and we are attempting to do a simple bird lesson. And bird and people are two subjects that are much welcomed by fine line artists because there's a lot of detail work that spontaneous style is hard to depict. And because of the material is used, a skill is used, so it's easier to show the intricacy of people or bird or animals. And this particular subject is inspired by a photograph. The bird is orange, Tanager, and that's our base. So
who's the photo by?
The photo is by Brian Goebel. And so this is the painting we are based on. The material we're going to use three different kind of brushes. One is we use for the line work, which is red feather. We were asked a question, what's the difference between small, medium, and large or red feather brush? They are all have very sharp tip. The difference is the body of the brush vary in size. And so if you are good on control the pressure of your brush, then you can go larger size so the hold ink longer, so you don't have to reload the brush. If you are beginners and have trouble to hold the to control the pressure of the brush, so if you have too big body, then sometimes too much liquid coming out. So then the small one is your choice. This is our line brush, which is red feather small. And then we have two kind of wash brush. One for the small area, we use the small double happiness. This is originally is one of our small calligraphy brush. The reason I'm using this is because this brush has soft hair outside and hard hair inside. So it's very soft to the touch, so it wouldn't hurt this delicate size paper we're using. If you use like Happy Doll or any other small line brush, a lot of times the brush the hair is pretty abrasive, so it scratches the paper when you have to layer after layer. So I'm using one for applying the color, one to pull the color. And then the third brush we use for the larger area, we use fine, small, soft. Again, the brush is very soft, and then so we can apply to the color several times without hurting the brush. Now we're talking about the paper. The paper is specifically designed for the fine line. This I'm using what our top of the line called shimmering paper. And this particular paper is very translucent and hold the color well and has a sizing on there so it doesn't run. the last but not the least is the color. The color I'm using today, I use the bright light color we've been using lately, and that's a Chinese watercolor. Or you can use your Marie's. I would highly recommend to use a Chinese Chinese brand brush painting color because it's more stable when you wet mount. Because this particular art, a lot of times you apply different layers, and so when you wet mount, has a tendency to run or taking off from the original painting. Usually the Western color doesn't hold the moisture as well as the Chinese color. So the ink we use our Fineline ink, which has a high contents of glue. So it's also for the stability of the resin. And the last we use some to accent some white feather, and we use the bleed proof white. This is the jar we use. So on this particular subject, I'm going to use burnt sienna, add ink for the dark feather, like the wing and the tail. And then I have red for the top, the crown of the bird. And we have the vermilion for the head of the bird. And then we have yellow. And add a little bit vermilion to soften it up. And that's the body of the bird. And then we have the bleed proof white for the feather. This particular art, sometimes it takes several layers, so it's a little bit tedious than Xie Yi style and takes longer because each layer, when you apply, you have to wait until dry before you add another layer. Can you do wet on wet? On a certain situation, you could, but then it's a special look you want to achieve. But usually, it's each layer. You don't apply the second layer until the first layer is dry. Say we have this bird. If you are very confident in your drawing, I will freehand draw the bird. If you're not, then I'll put underneath and to trace the shape of the bird. And the line work is kind of important because a lot of times it shows the skill of your work. Usually on the subject, we use a medium ink to do the line work because you don't want to use very strong ink because it takes away from the color later on you're going to apply. But then you also want to show the shape. So light ink is too light. And then when we are doing this particular one, I'm going to show the beak of it. So the beak is a triangle. So I probably do a little bit bigger than I would do the actual bird so you can see it more clearly. So I started with a little bit pressure. And then lighten up. So then let me show you also the eyes. I also show the So we often talk about then the head. We often talk about what we call as nail head, which is a little bit pressure, and mouse tail. So on the nail head, mouse tail. So I usually, before I start, most of us probably have a steady hand issue. Then I just start with this kind of exercise to make sure that my hand can be steady. So nail head and mouse tail. Taper it off. So this line work is very important. So in the small area, you can see that the beak is difficult. So I'm doing bigger, so you can see. I'm doing the eye again. Bigger eye. And then when we are at it, might as well showing how the eye is being done. So a lot of books, and when you saw the eye, sometimes a little bit too strong. So it looked like the bird is angry. So this is how you can make your bird is not angry. So the black part of the eyeball, you do an upper U shape. So it looks like the bird is smiling. So that's the trick of it. So if you do a complete circle, then the eye looks very angry.
So now you did this line work beforehand.
Yes.
And now you're going to
do the shading.
Demonstrate the initial shading.
So the small area, I'm using the small double happiness. Even though the paper is sized, so it's misleading that you don't have to worry about the moisture. Yes, you do. Because if you are too wet, then you have this puddle of water. And I'll show it to you. So this brush is too wet. And then your brush for pulling also need to have control the moisture. If it's too wet, you have the water. So you soften it. Each time when you soften it, you clean your brush. So it's very important when you apply if this brush is too dry, then you don't have anything to pull. But if it's too wet, the liquid is going to back up to the area, then your area becomes muddy. So, and the same thing when you're pulling the brush from both sides. You also want to make sure that your brush is not too wet. When you are too wet, this is what happened. So this puddles of water accumulate. Then this area is going to become muddy because you have part of the area is too wet, part of the area has puddle of ink. So it's not a smooth degradation. So that's the skill you need to learn for this particular art. So now I have this small double happiness as pulling brush. You can see it's cleaner. And then this is, I'm going to apply the ink with. So we started with the smallest area is where the beak is.
So this is you applying the ink.
And then I use the other brush to pull it, to fade the ink.
And then you're switching brushes to a clean brush.
Right.
And then you're pulling, fading.
And then I constantly washing the brush and drying the brush. So I ahead of time, I have some of these feather to separate the head from the body. Applying. So make sure when you pull, you don't pull the body of where the ink is. You're only pulling the edge. So I'm doing a little bit high.
So you're applying there and then switching brushes and pulling. And applying.
And pull. And then on where the head is and the body, pulling downwards, clean and dry.
So you're applying ink there.
Mm-hmm. And then I pull the
brush.
Switch the brush. I fade. And then I use the same small brush to do the little claw. And then I fade. Okay, so then I'm doing the wing and the tail, which is important that you wanted to be able to leave some white space between the shade to show the feathers. So don't apply the ink too deep.
So this is applying the ink.
I apply the ink.
And then you switch the brush.
I purposely leave a little line, white line between the line and where I apply the ink. I'm fading the edges. Okay, so the challenging part is on this little feather on the wing. So it is important that you leave some white line between, white area between them, the ink, so you don't cover everything, then becomes a big blob. So you want to share how we show the feathers is that you leaving some white area. So that's why a soft, small brush is essential for this project. So again, small double happiness. It's soft, but still have a very good line.
So you're applying the ink there, and then switching brushes, and then fading.
Fading.
So how do you decide within the shape where to apply the ink?
You leave a white, you apply very tiny space away from the line. That's
and then you're fading it towards the center.
Towards, yes. So you want to make sure there is a white line left there so you can see that each feather separate. So again, this is a bigger area, you can see it better. So Evan, if you can move your camera to the actual bird, there is a little white line between each feather. And that's what we try to show. Okay, then we switch to our small soft brush, fine soft. So for the same thing, now we're doing the body of the birds, which is a much larger area. So we have one brush, we apply the ink, and one brush we pull. So like underneath the body, oh, this is too dark.
Great. You're all set.
So we soften on each side. So this is how we achieve the round shape of the bird.
So you're using the ink shading layer to kind of show the shadows in the original picture.
Yes.
So if you look at the body of the bird there, you can see kind of a shadow around there, and that's what's going on here. See the shadow, and then you have this bright spot here that represents the way the light is reflecting off of the midsection right here. So you get that little spot.
So we're going to do the bird eyes. Straight ink. Make sure. It's an oval shape. With U shape, I'm sorry. With the white on the top. Okay, so the shading is done. And had one done before this. So I'm using small happy dot, small double happiness. Again for the smaller area. So I have a little bit yellow on the beak. And then near the mouth, oh Jesus. And I used red.
So just like the ink, you have one brush for applying the color, and then you switch, and then you use another brush to fade the color.
Then I'm going to use dispersed sienna with ink to do some of the feather area. I'm using the bigger brush to wash the bird's body. So I do around the bird. Might be a little bit too wet, but I'll have another piece. So I'm using a little happy, small double happiness, very faint yellow for the white part, the bird. And then the base of the beak, a little vermilion. Okay, so it's a little bit too wet, but I will try to attempt to do a vermilion wash over the red on the So if you are working on it, I wait until it complete dry. So this show you that if you don't wait it dry, so it just becomes muddy. So this is something you don't want to do. I will show you the one that I did before. So this one is different when it's dry. It's a much cleaner look. So on this one, I'm going to show you that I will use the red feather line brush. The belief blue wet, I will add some wet feather.
So you loaded the red feather small brush, which is the fine line brush with the bleed proof white.
Mm-hmm. So now we want to add something that the bird is standing on. And there is a lot of inspiration. You can do the fine line style, which will be line work and washes, or you can just do the Sumi-e style. In this way, I'm using a full Lotus brush, load some burnt sienna, and a little bit ink on the tip. So now the bird is standing on a trunk.
So do you have any tips for painting Shui style on fully sized paper?
Yes, we can talk a little bit about that. Okay, so the brush stroke is similar, but except because it's the water stay on the top, so then you can add ink and play with it. So like Shui style, one stroke is done. This you can pull. You can add, say if I want to add brown tone. You can see there's puddle. So if I dab a little ink on it, then it gives you this interesting one. So if I want to add green to it, okay, also.
So for Western watercolorists who are sort of frustrated by this idea of doing Shui or spontaneous style on raw paper, if they work on semi-sized paper or even fully sized paper, then they can get back in their comfort zone a little bit with this idea of being able to manipulate the strokes after they've been applied.
Yes.
Which is a very common technique in Western watercolor. And this is also showing how you don't have to have one style or the other. They can be mixed quite effectively. And so what you did in this painting was you used the Gong-bi style to sort of highlight the star of your painting. But then rather than, spend an equal amount of time developing the same amount of detail in the supporting element, you just chose to do the supporting element in the Shui style, and then it was much quicker.
Yes. So this is for beginner, and 3-4 layers would accomplish. And then we have subject on more advanced that is coming up in our workshop. If you want more detail, you can go call us or email us, which is the crane. And this particular one would take at least 6 or 8 hours to accomplish.
So you have an upcoming workshop that's on October the 21st, where you'll cover this subject. You have 10 spots for people to participate in person with you, but then there's also an online option where people can paint along virtually in an online format. And people can find out more about this on our website.
Yes.